Hello and welcome to Roughtober 2021. My name is Matt Wilcoxon. I'm the rector of St. John's Anglican Church and the chairperson of St. John's Community Services. I'm standing here in front of Rough Edges in Darlinghurst, our drop-in center where people come to find a hot meal, to experience community and friendship, and to access the services that they need for wherever they are in their individual journey. This is an incredibly special place in the lives of our patrons, our volunteers, our staff, and really the entire community. And it's a service we couldn't continue to run here without the help of people like you who have signed up to sleep rough tonight, or those of you who've given in support and helped us to close in on that goal of $200,000 raised. So let me just begin today with a warm thank you to you. We're so grateful for your partnership in this important work. Now, we've got a stellar program for you this evening. Stan Grant is going to be moderating a fantastic panel of encouraging and inspiring people who have lived experiences of homelessness. And our hope is that this component of Roughtober will help you to expand your knowledge of the issues and to deepen your sense of empathy and to encourage you to continue as a change maker in this space, not just tonight, but throughout the year. So thanks for being with us. As we begin tonight, let me turn it over to Auntie Ann Weldon for our welcome to country.
Good evening, everyone. First, I need to acknowledge that I am a Wiradjuri Koori Bala. And it is with pleasure as an elder of New South Wales Aboriginal Land Council and Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, a member and their representative on behalf of the Gadigal elders and the community here in Sydney, as it is with honour that I stand before you all. I acknowledge all Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal brothers and sisters that have joined us for this gathering. And I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we gather and meet on, the Eora Nation and the Gadigal people, and pay my respects to all elders past, present and emerging. I acknowledge the spiritual ancestors of the Gadigal people, for they shall always remain within their land, our Mother Earth. For our people have been a part of this land that stretches far back beyond 60,000 years. And there are many Aboriginal nations and tribes, and we are all bound by the same unifying elements of our culture. For we have one of the world's oldest religious systems, and there are many different language groups. And my people, Aboriginal people, look with pride upon the depth and the richness of our culture, and we certainly adhere to our spiritual commitments to the land and to each other. And that has been achieved through fortitude, courage and wisdom. One of the greatest possessions of Australia is the story of our country, for it is truly remarkable, and the far-reaching story of our Aboriginal culture, for we have an history that is impressive of daring, courage, cleverness, resourcefulness and resilience. And my people, Aboriginal Australia, we have one of the longest unbroken threads of human culture on the planet. The Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, we certainly promote a vision of working together as one community and to achieve as one community. And the boundaries for Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council spans from the Hawkes River to the north, the Nepean to the west, and the Georges River to the south. So it is with honour, as a representative of Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council and an elder, I feel very, very privileged to have been asked to conduct the Welcome to Country for your Rough Edges panel discussion at your Roughtober event. And I wish you every success, and may the force and the power of our elders keep you safe and well. I'll ask just for a moment that everybody pause and remember our loved ones that have passed over before us, the incredible giants that have allowed each and every one of us to stand on their shoulders, the beautiful people that are beside you right now, but more importantly, they're gorgeous, precious little ones that follow in our footsteps. So may my people spirit walk and guide all of us as we continue on our journey together, and let that journey be one where we will continue to make our country the best in the world. So once again, welcome to the land of the mighty Eora Nation and Gadigal people. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Auntie Anne. That was a fantastic welcome. I'm Stan Grant. Welcome you all here today. I want to pay my respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and to pay my respects to the people of the lands wherever you're joining us from today. A fantastic conversation we're going to have about homelessness, its impact, the experience of homelessness, and the hope that emerges as well. To set the scene, I wanted to start with some numbers, and really sobering numbers that they are. Right now, there are almost 120,000 people experiencing homelessness across Australia. 120,000 people. That's a city of people right now experiencing homelessness. Almost 40,000 in New South Wales, where we are. When you consider the impact of homelessness and how people can emerge from that, consider also that the social housing wait list is more than 10 years. So a person experiencing homelessness now and hoping to move into social housing may have to wait 10 years. What happens in that 10-year period? In Sydney, over 800 people sleep rough or are in crisis housing. I want to talk about youth because this is one of the really disturbing statistics as well. Youth homelessness in New South Wales has increased 117% from 2006 to 2016. We're failing another generation of our youth, a 117% increase. And we will hear Auntie Anne there talking about Indigenous people, Indigenous communities. Of the children who were homeless on census night, 4 in 10, that's almost 40%, 4 in 10 identified as Indigenous Australians. Think of this, that Indigenous Australians are only 3% of the Australian population. It gives an indication of how the most vulnerable people are vulnerable. Now we want to get from people who have had this experience of homelessness, a first-hand account of dealing with that and how you can emerge from that and where you find hope and the strength to go on. I want to introduce you to our panel now who are joining me here. Lizzie, beside me, is a 20-year-old woman with a lived experience of mental health issues, suicide ideation, homelessness, domestic and family violence. And Lizzie is currently, well, you can tell me what you're studying. What are you studying?
I'm currently studying law and psychology at Notre Dame.
Well, congratulations. And you got your exams coming, right?
Thank you. Yes, I do.
All right. Uncle Tony, next to me here. And I say uncle with great respect and reverence because Tony is an adopted one of us, an adopted one of my people, an Indigenous person in Australia. And we're pleased to be able to say that. And that was an honour that was bestowed on you, Tony, right?
That is correct. It was bestowed on me by Auntie Jean Phillips. And I'm very grateful to her for that honour. I do take it as quite a responsibility. And
it is an honour, and we're honoured to count you among us as well, honoured to count all of you among us. Tony as well, just like Lizzie, has experienced all of those same things and homelessness. Tony is a volunteer team leader at the Rough Edges Community Cafe and is employed by the Urban Exposure Program, taking groups on walks around Darlinghurst and King's Cross, sharing his story on the way. Grace is next to Uncle Tony, just like Lizzie and Tony. Grace has experienced all of these things, the issues of addiction and homelessness and health issues. Grace, tell us what you're doing now, though. You're a peer support worker.
Yeah, so I work with people that have hepatitis and I help them access treatment as well as talk about my experience with getting hepatitis and clearing hepatitis. And I also do the urban walks as well, which is also peer work.
Fantastic. And Ryan is with us as well. Ryan, team leader at Rough Edges, supporting people experiencing homelessness and school teacher as well and youth leader?
Yep, yeah.
Okay.
Quite some time ago.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay. And tell us just quickly about your work with Rough Edges.
Yeah, so I've been working there for almost 4 years now. And so my job is to basically oversee all the operations that we do manage the volunteer base, which at this stage is about 130 to 150, and of course our number of staff, which is ever increasing at this stage. So, yeah.
Great, good work. Now look, I wanted to start with a discussion about homelessness and what it means and how we define that. And feel free to jump in at any time when you want to. Don't wait for me to ask the question. Jump in, it's a conversation between us. I just wanted to start with my own story and my own observation about this. I often tell people about the experience of homelessness, and people would look at me now and see me on television and think, well, homelessness, could you have experienced homelessness? For the first 14, 15 years of my life, my family did not have a home. We were an Aboriginal family. We were an itinerant family. We were a family moving from town to town. We didn't have permanent employment. Home was wherever we found it, often with relatives, moving in with other people, sometimes in caravans and sometimes in tents. And if we had a home, we'd move in there for a little while. It meant that I had to change school constantly. I changed schools 13 or 14 times before I was even into high school. So, I wouldn't sit here and say that I share the same experiences as each of you do, but when we talk about homelessness, it can describe a whole range of experiences, isn't it? Uncle Tony, can I start with you and how you would define homelessness?
There's actually 4 definitions of homelessness that are used by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. There is primary homelessness, secondary homelessness, tertiary homelessness, and inadequately housed.
And what does that mean? They're different grades, I suppose, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah, primary homelessness is what people traditionally think of homelessness as. It's sleeping rough. It's sleeping in parks. It's sleeping in cars, things like that. Secondary homelessness is when you do actually have a roof over your head, but it's not secure in the sense that you don't know how long you'll get to stay. It's things like couch surfing. It's things like staying in a men's hostel or a woman's refuge or a refuge. This is actually living in a boarding house. And
that's considered still homelessness because it's not a permanent home, is it?
No, it's not a permanent home. You can actually be thrown out of a boarding house at 2 o'clock in the morning for being 3 days late with the rent. I've seen people I was once asked to leave a boarding house when I was only 3 days in advance in the rent. And they're even using things like licensee agreements, which come under the 1861 Innkeepers Act,
right,
which was originally set up to allow country publicans to provide booked accommodation for people like shearers and fruit pickers, but also get to kick them out in the middle of the night.
So this means they can move you on at any time. So,
yes.
so you have the primary, secondary, tertiary, and the fourth one, I think you said?
Inadequately housed is basically when there's just too many people for that particular building, that particular dwelling. That often relates to overseas students in the CBD.
Where would you put yourself, Lizzie, in your experience of homelessness when you listen to those categorisations?
Yeah, so for my experience, I was couch surfing. So as Tony mentioned, not knowing how long I was staying anywhere, it was always just temporary accommodation, and yeah, just no stability.
Can I just also say to people that we're going to be hearing some tough things and people have experienced some tough things. And I want to remind you that if anything we discuss tonight brings up issues for you, please reach out to the services available. Lifeline, 1800 Respect. So keep that in mind. Lizzie, and feel free at any time if something's uncomfortable for you or you don't want to share something, we entirely understand. But what led to that for you?
Yeah, so for me, I came from a family of domestic violence and complex trauma. So I'd grown up with this family. I went to a private school, had this very privileged lifestyle. From the outside in, it just looked like I was living a happy life. Behind closed doors, that wasn't the case. I was experiencing all these things in addition to having mental health issues. So when I turned 18, I just knew I couldn't stay there any longer, and that's when I started couch surfing.
And what about you, Grace? Homelessness, what does it mean for you and what factors contributed to your own experience of it?
Oh, a lot. It feels weird starting from like when I was born, but I couldn't talk as a teen until I was in high school, so I wasn't good with reading.
What do you mean? You
I had verbal dyspraxia, so it's like dyslexia but with talking.
Right.
So I was always very lonely and felt like very depressed, I think, because of that.
And you speak so well now, and I'm wondering
I
how.
always say it's funny if I do public speaking now.
But how? I mean, when you say something like that, how does that present itself? Does it mean you didn't talk, or you were
Well,
nervous
everything
about
came
talking?
out opposite. Like I remember pillow was Hoggarth, blanket was Googie.
You had a whole language.
Yeah, and like in my brain it sounded like it was coming out normal, but it wasn't. I did 6 years of speech therapy, and if you can't talk, you can't read and that sort of thing. So I thought I was dumb, and so I left school at 16. And yeah, I was just very depressed, and I really loved my parents and didn't want them to be. And I was depressed, and I was drinking at like 12, and so I thought, well, I'll move. I'm not saying a lot right now, but I thought,
No, say it.
and so I thought, well, I'll move out, then they won't know what I'm doing. And I had a job as a personal assistant at the time. It was a good job. And then I moved into a boarding house like that day, and it didn't go well. It was all men, and one of the guys was asking me out all the time. And he's like, are we friends? And I'm like, yes. And he started trying to kiss me all the time. And then I did boarding houses, share houses for a while. And then it was friends lounges, but then you could only do that for so long. Then it was squats, on street a couple of nights, car for a while. Even like when you walk past people's houses and I've got like a lounge out the front, I just sleep on people's lounges out the front of their houses, all sorts of places.
And were you still keeping this from your parents? Because you had a good home life, you were
Yeah,
saying?
they knew, but they didn't know. Like I'd still go home every Sunday with my green bag, and they'd wash my clothes, and Mum would just like say, "You look tired," but they told me like that I had to leave. So, yeah.
Yeah. One of the things, Tony, that again, some of the misconceptions around homelessness is that it is sleeping rough. I said before there are about 800 people in Sydney right now who are sleeping rough, but that's not all of the people who are experiencing homelessness. I think it's only about 8%, isn't it, total experience in sleeping rough?
That's actually people in the Sydney City Council area.
Right.
There's homeless people right all throughout.
And not everyone's sleeping rough, of course.
Yeah, but there's people sleeping rough at Newtown. There's people sleeping rough out at Parramatta. They're sleeping rough in all sorts of places. And, of course, they're also couch surfing, and they're in boarding houses all through Sydney. So there's, lots more than just 800 people sleeping rough. But there would have to be more than 10,000 people homeless in Sydney.
There's a lot of people in the bush in the Hawkesbury as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like camping, and the salvos goes out with bacon and eggs every week. Suppose if they're going to be homeless, they may as well be homeless somewhere nice.
Well, you mentioned before, Lizzie, couch surfing. Was sleeping rough an experience for you at all at any point?
No, it wasn't. So I never slept rough. I always had a roof over my head, and I was lucky for that.
Ryan, you would experience all of this, of course, in your work. People and outwardly, people thinking this person doesn't fit the commonly held definition of what homelessness is.
Yeah.
And still need support.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I'm kind of surprised all the time, we have people that don't look homeless at all. They don't even, fit that kind of stereotype in the slightest, that are coming in for food and community. And I think it just kind of blows out your conceptions of what fits in that box in a lot of ways. But yeah, like you said, I mean, sleeping rough accounts for 7% of homelessness in Australia, which means there's a multitude of other people struggling in different ways, as Tony has already outlined, that still come to us or go to other services for support in that way.
Again, in the popular imagination, someone who is homeless is someone who's poor, or someone who's disadvantaged, or hasn't had access to education or employment. That's not true either, is it, Ryan? It can be, someone can find themselves in a homeless situation very easily, and people from backgrounds, Lizzie was saying, private school background, apparently stable home and family, and you can still find yourself in that situation.
I did a tour once, and
Yeah.
one of the teachers was like, "She comes from Oatley. Oatley, that's nicer than where you guys live." I really thought that was funny.
And you must see this, Ryan. It can happen very easily.
Yeah, I mean, it's always amazing to me when I really get to know someone that's come into rough edges, where you sit down and speak with them for a while, and they'll say something that just surprises you. So, one time I spoke to a bloke who had been quite a successful architect, and owned his own firm and all that kind of thing. And one of the most eccentric people I've ever met in my life, I will say. But ended up in homelessness, and eventually he shared with me that it was after a breakdown, a mental health.
And that can happen a lot, isn't it? People experience a mental health episode, and that triggers a spiral.
Yeah, and I think, I find it really difficult to kind of draw connections between people or see the similarities. But I think one thing that stands out to me is trauma. Trauma tends to be present in a lot of people's stories.
And that can be a job loss, that can be the end of a relationship, that can be a death in the family, that can be an injury, an illness. I mean, it can be so many things, can't it?
Absolutely. I mean, in Grace's story, the inability to speak is that would have been horrible, traumatic. Absolutely. And so we tend to see that in so many different people's stories.
And being homeless causes a whole lot more trauma.
Absolutely.
And then people use drugs because of trauma, but then no addict hasn't had trauma from using as well. But I also think another reason there's so many homeless people is just there's no affordable housing in Sydney. Affordable housing is meant to be 25% of your income, but on average people are paying 50%. If you're below the poverty line, you pay 80% at least for a boarding house, which is one room, no kitchen, share bathroom, horrible.
That's one of the things you're a big advocate of, Tony, isn't it? Is proper public housing.
Yeah, that's right. I'm living in a privately leased place myself at the moment, but my older brother David was actually homeless for 30 years. He finished 1 year of a communications degree at university, then mental health issues arose for him, and he was homeless for 30 years before he was taken in first by the Wesley Mission for 6 months at Edward Eagle Lodge, and then spent a year with a Mission Australia Living Skills program in supported accommodation, and now he has been in housing department accommodation in Surrey Hills for the last 17 years. And he has over 600 CDs. He's written 5 books of poetry.
Wow.
Now he's settled. Now he can do these things.
When you say something like that, and 30 years, and we sort of brush past that. When you said it, I just thought, 30 years. How does that happen? How does someone remain homeless for 30 years?
Not enough support services.
And it can happen easily.
Yeah, I mean, the Sisters of Charity did a great deal of work helping David, but if it hadn't been for them and the other support services, he would still be homeless today, and quite possibly would have died by now.
Is that something you come across too, the longevity of homelessness?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's never, in some cases, I was reading earlier that when surveyed, I think something like 16% of people that are homeless will just say, I need affordable housing.
Right.
52% will say, I need affordable housing plus short-term service support. And then another, something like 26%, I can't remember exactly, will say, I need supported housing plus intense support. Which, and support in this case means social work, means counselling, all sort of services like that, medical support as well. And so, it's not as simple as just sticking someone in a house and going, right,
away you go,
you're done,
yeah.
off you go, all good. Because what I mean, on a very simple, in a very simple case, it's like you take someone who's been living homeless for, say, 5 or 6 years. They're used to the noise of the street. They're used to waking up with people around them all the time. Stick them in a home where there's 4 walls and they're completely on their own. How isolating. I mean imagine the silence.
I was so lonely. You're not
Were you?
just
Yeah.
You're on the street and you're with other people all the time and you feel sorry for them. You're just sleeping in a squat with them. So you invite them back to your house and that's not helpful.
Right.
But you can't, if you're just with them, So then, yeah. But it just was so lonely.
Tony, do you want to say something? I felt like you wanted to say something then.
Yeah, I was actually going to give a plug for my brother's poetry.
Yeah, do that. Yeah.
That's
what we're here
he's
for.
written 5 books of poetry, and if you go to A Street Spirituality at wordpress.com and look for A Street Spirituality by David Marsh, you'll find his poetry, and he loves it when people do that. And it's actually brilliant poetry. There was a professor of literature at University of New South Wales who launched his last book because that's how good the poetry is.
Yeah, well, keep an eye out for David Marsh's poetry. A big plug from his brother Tony. I want to ask you, Lizzie, about the experience of homelessness. And again, feel free if you don't, if this is difficult to talk about, but, looking at your own biography, what you went through at such a young age, mental health issues, you talked about family violence and suicide ideation. You're a young person. You've got this incredible future. You're incredibly bright, educated, you're studying at university. And yet you can still experience those things, can't you?
Definitely. So when I hit my lowest of lows, I was couch surfing. I was actually currently studying at university. I was working 3 jobs and I hit rock bottom. I couldn't see any way of getting out of the mental health issues I was in. And
What do you mean? You say rock bottom. What does that mean? What does that feel like? Is that a sense of hopelessness? Is that you can't see a way out?
Yeah, you can't see a way out. And for me, I ended up overdosing in an attempt to take my own life. I just could not see how I could get out of this situation, even despite going to school, having uni ahead of me. It was like a black tunnel.
How do you pull yourself out of that if you don't have the stability of family, if you don't have the stability of a home?
Yeah, so I came out of ICU after fighting for my life. I came out, I had great second families who tried to take me in, help me to keep fighting. But I realised I just couldn't do it on my own, and that's when I went to the GP and I said I need to go into mental health hospital. And so I had an admission of 7 weeks, and
That's brave too, isn't it? To actually, how do you do that? How do you say, I'm going to take myself to the GP and ask for this?
Because I knew the only other option was me not being here anymore, and I couldn't do that to the people around me that loved me. So I owed it to them and I owed it to myself to try. So I was in hospital, as I said, for 7 weeks, and that was because they wouldn't release me until I had permanent accommodation. So that's when I started getting in touch with youth housing.
Grace, for you as well, how did the mental health issues present themselves for you?
Well, I remember when I was always very anxious and very, very depressed. And then I just started covering it up with drugs, I suppose. And then using drugs make it even worse. And I got involved, when you're homeless, and a shame. And then I was in a domestic violent relationship. And then you stop using, and all the stuff comes back.
But when you say you stop using, that's easy to say. But how? How do you deal with that?
I'm very proud to say only 2% of people stop using heroin.
Yeah.
So I remember thinking I'd be arrogant to think I could stop. But it was quite a few things happened at once. I got arrested and I had a violent partner, and we were like a codependent using relationship, and I couldn't really ring the police if he was trying to attack me for my heroin or for money or whatever, because I had for drugs, and he'd be screaming at the police like she's got heroin and all stuff like that. So when I got arrested and I'm like, well, and then I got him out of my house, but then the stress of getting him out of my house made my face collapse. I had Bell's palsy, but my eye was down here, my lip was down there. It looked like I had a stroke, and it was like that for years. It's still a little bit funny. And then my parents also found out because I'd been arrested, and I was worried about going to jail. I technically went to jail. I got a MIN number, but I've never been. So for 3.5 years, I was just like getting tested by parole and doing community service, and I'm like, I've got to pull my head in.
and you managed.
Yeah.
I mean, that
I'm lucky because all those things happened at once, because I wanted to before that. I was just so sick of being sick. Like, I wanted to stop. I just didn't think I could. And then when I did all those things, I just thought I'll just stop for 3.5 years, and then it was just easier and easier and easier.
And you also had your own experience with struggles with mental health.
Yeah, my mental health issues centred around depression, and it started very early in childhood. It first became noticeable when I was 6, and by the time I was 8, it was that bad that I ran a fever of
very young.
41. Yeah, and like a fever that high can kill someone. And I had hallucinations that night that were absolutely terrifying. I thought I was going to die. I thought I'd already lost my mind. In my early 20s, I actually had a bad acid trip, a bad LSD trip, on top of the Sydney Harbour Bridge at 2 o'clock in the morning. And that was far less terrifying than the nightmares I had, the hallucinations I had when I was 8.
Wow.
And it just meant that I always felt that no one understood me, no one cared about me, and that there was no future for me.
How much of these, Ryan, are recurring themes for you? How often do you hear this?
I mean, yeah, I think drug use is pretty rampant through the homeless community. I think, one thing it tells me straight away is the wrong, or let's say, not say wrong, but the attitude that we all have towards drug users is...
To blame the user?
To blame the user, exactly, is a problem, and there's a great book by a bloke named Johann Hari called Chasing the Scream, who really talks about this in a great way in terms of this is very much people falling into an issue that they never really had that much of a choice in. And, to me, that's so important to understand. So walking in a space like Rough Edges, that's what I want all our volunteers to know, is, how should we look at drug users and things like that. But in terms of mental illness, I find mental illness, again, is pretty rampant in roughies. We see a lot of people coming in with that. I think that the stress, the pure anxiety that you often feel when you're in homelessness just accentuates it so much more.
Remember, we want to hear from you as well, so please send your questions through. We'll get to some of those questions. We've been talking about homelessness, what it means, the experience of it, what contributes to it, the impact of mental illness, the impact of drug use. But of course, there is another side to this too. There is the future. And how do you find a future? What gives you hope for the future? We're going to talk about that in a moment. First, though, I want to play you this message from Archbishop Kanishka Raphael, looking at the history of Rough Edges, the importance of ministries like Rough Edges, the story of the Good Samaritan. Let's have a look at this, and then we'll come back to our conversation.
One of the most famous passages in the Bible is Luke chapter 10. It's called the Parable of the Good Samaritan. It's a story that Jesus tells in response to a smart, moral man who wants to test Jesus. He wants to ask, what does God require of a human being? And Jesus engages with him in a little dialogue and quickly draws out the right answer from the man. What is required of every human is to love God fully and to love your neighbour as yourself. Love God fully, love your neighbour as yourself, Jesus says. Do this and you will live. Of course, that's easier to say than to do. So the man pushes back. Who is my neighbour? He asks of Jesus. He wants to define his neighbour as someone who shares his interests, his politics, his religion, his social status, his ethnicity. If he can do all that, then maybe this is a requirement that he can live up to. But Jesus won't have it. He won't let him water down what the law says, the requirement to love our neighbour. And to make this clear, Jesus tells the man a story, what we call the parable of the Good Samaritan. It's a model of the neighbour love that God requires of every human being. And it's a model of compassion. It's a model of social care and concern that takes risks and crosses borders. In the story, there's a man who is on a journey. He's assaulted by robbers and left for dead by the side of the road. And 3 people pass him by down the road. The first 2 cross the road to get away from him. He's no neighbour to them. They leave him for dead. It's only the 3rd man who stops, filled with compassion, and meets the needs of this man in practical ways. He meets his medical needs by bandaging his wounds. He meets his transportation needs by putting him on his donkey and giving him a lift. He meets his financial needs by paying for his accommodation overnight. And he meets his personal relational needs by staying with him and caring for him personally. When Jesus is told the story, he asks the man who asked the question, which of these 3 people was a neighbour to the injured man? The answer, of course, is obvious, and the man answers correctly, the one who had mercy on him. And Jesus says to him, go and do likewise. One of the things that's central to the work of the Christian church and to the life of Christian faith is social concern, doing good to all, the New Testament says. You can't be a Christian and not care about this sort of work. To be a Christian is to know that you, like the man left for dead on the side of the road, were in need. And someone, Jesus Christ, drew near in compassion, came and saved us. And if this experience of mercy from the Lord Jesus is something that is real, powerful and deep in your own life, then it is absolutely transformative. Mercy from God gives birth to mercy in his people. And when that has happened, the follower of Jesus is someone who is compelled to look on those around them as neighbours to be loved. This experience of God's compassion is what has led people here at St John's Anglican Church in Darlinghurst from the late 1980s, 1987, to start a coffee shop to welcome in people experiencing marginalisation, those experiencing mental health disorders, addictions, sex workers, the transgender community. In 1996, this became the Rough Edges Ministry and St John's Community Services, providing meals and other food assistance, a place to find community, essential skills training, dedicated caseworkers, free legal services, chaplaincy services, and other things as well. When this sort of mercy is shown, dignity is given, lives are changed, and the local community is strengthened and renewed. And all of this happens because people's whose hearts have been touched by mercy, continue to support this work. It's a sacrifice of comfort to sleep rough tonight. It's a sacrifice of time to show up as a regular volunteer, as so many do. It's a sacrifice to give generously and cheerfully as a donor. And my hope and prayer for you as you continue to do this good work is that you experience the truth of what Jesus said. It is more blessed to give than to receive. God bless you.
That's a great question, Stan, and I would like to answer it. Yeah. No, I think the big thing we really wanted people to walk away from Rough Edges is that they matter. And, there's a dignity message within that. There's a value message within that, but also there's a value add message within that. So, things that we've been working on most recently is a program called New Skills. And that's about giving people opportunity to give, to add value to the Rough Edges community specifically. Because that's all about mattering, that we value you, but you add value is so important. And so, I think the big thing is mattering and dignity that we really try to champion, I suppose.
Grace, now, before we started our conversation tonight, we were talking.
Is it on?
How's this one? Now it's operating. Okay, Grace. Before we started this conversation, you said something to me that I think we need to hear. And listening to Ryan, and Ryan's talking there about the work that Rough Edges can do, and people mattering, and making people believe that that they do matter. But you said something as well. You said, "But don't give me advice." What did you mean by that?
Oh, it's just I've been into services before and I'm just more venting, and they start saying, well, have you tried this? Have you tried this? And I'm saying, yes, I've tried that. Yes, I've tried that. And I find it a little bit insulting, because it's like I know about all the services, I've been trying to do this. I even told them, look, I run legal aid. But
someone will say, get a job. And you go, hello?
Yeah.
Do you think I don't want a job?
Yeah, I think that's another thing about being homeless so young. They just think, you can just get a job. You can't get a job without a house. Who's going to give a homeless person a job? I had a few jobs like putting up posters and that kind of, handing out flyers, but not a proper job.
So what do you want? If it's not advice...
just to someone say, that sucks. It's a bit of empathy.
Ryan, it's listening a lot of the time, isn't it?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And I tend to find, a lot of the time people already know the answer that they're looking for. I've had a conversation where a guy came in and basically told me, 5 major issues that were happening in his life. And so the question was, well, which one do you have to knock over first?
Right.
And he knew, he had an ice addiction. I need to knock that. That's got to go. And I said, how are you going to do it? And he knew the answer, he knew where he was going to go and get that. But it's just that listening factor that needs to happen before any action can take place. And I think people just need to know you're in it with them. You're sitting in the darkness with them, kind of thing, rather than trying to turn on a light somewhere.
And it sucks.
And it sucks.
Yes.
It sucks big time. Lizzie, you said something before. You said when you're at your lowest, you had a second family. And I'm just wondering about that support and that messaging, and whether what Grace said resonates with you, that even people who may care and love you and want the best can sometimes get it wrong, or you're not hearing what you want to hear, or you're not ready to hear. What was your experience?
Yeah, well, for me, it was quite different. I my entire life I had gone through my family issues, my mental health by myself. I never opened up to anyone. I dealt with it all just purely by myself. So for me, it was almost the opposite in learning to trust people, to let them in and to know that I'm not alone. I'm not doing this on my own. Like, I have people there to support me. And honestly, in my lowest of lows, I kept going for them. So without that, I probably wouldn't be here today.
How do you build trust?
It's a good question.
Because when you said that, I thought, oh, that's a big word. And when you say trust, and you said I had to build trust, I thought, how do you build trust?
So when I was at the worst situations, when I was having breakdowns, when I couldn't get up in the morning, they were there for me constantly. They didn't turn a blind eye. They didn't just brush me off. They were there when I thought no one was there for me. And I think that's, I guess, where my trust has come from.
Tony, is it also a question of judgment? The unconditionality of love and support without judgment. Is that what's important as well?
It's very important because, none of us like to be judged, especially none of us like to be judged harshly. And when you're going through an extremely hard time, being homeless is, being judged by someone who doesn't understand it and doesn't know the reasons why you became homeless, doesn't know what the answer to it all is, and is simply trying to guess at what it is and getting it wrong, it's really offensive. And it hurts. And it then becomes very difficult to even want to have a conversation with that person.
And did you feel judged a lot of the time, even when people were ostensibly there to support or help, that you felt as if you were judged? Was that your experience?
Oh, yeah. That has been my experience from early childhood right through, and it even continues to this day. That people tend to look at me and make assumptions about me, that they know more about my life or what the reasons for it all is or are, and they don't have a clue. They have no idea who I am, what my story is, and every time that happens, it always tends to be a negative stereotype. They've always got a view of me that isn't true and is demeaning, that's putting me down. And I hate that.
Grace, it's interesting as well. And look, we're all guilty of this. I've probably been guilty of it myself. You see someone and they're apparently or even obviously homeless, and there's a pity. Or, and you know, pity can be a really, it can be a really demeaning thing in some ways.
Yeah.
It can sort of be a patronising thing in some ways.
Totally. I remember, you could tell I was homeless by looking at me. You could tell that I was a drug user by looking at me. And I'd walk around with my green bag, and I just feel like people could just see me coming and were like just avoiding me. And I also felt like I felt like everyone was looking at me thinking, well, she must have ripped her family off. That's why she's not with her family. She must have done something wrong. So people just assume that about drug users. And then you see stuff on Current Affair about if they just had willpower, and there's even bumper stickers saying to shoot heroin addicts. It's like, and I think if they met me, they wouldn't want to shoot me, but you can't help but take it personally.
And it's funny too, Ryan, because there is this idea, and we have this in society, that, you've got to try harder and pull yourself up by the bootlaces and, you've got to do it for yourself. And that we get that messaging all the time. It's not that easy. And hard work is often not its own reward either. You can work very hard and still find yourself struggling. Absolutely.
I think, what I see time and time again is a fear that comes into play for people a lot. So, if we talk about, say, what you were saying, giving people advice or just casework, as it were, which is just supporting someone and in casework you ask the person to play a part in the journey, I suppose. But let's say that person doesn't pull off what their goals were for the week. They come back with that sense of failure, and that's a feeling in itself that they're terrified of. And so, it becomes this kind of
Fulfilling thing.
Self-fulfilling, yeah, exactly.
You don't want to go back after you haven't done it.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
miss the next appointment.
But you know, we can talk a lot about failure and what goes wrong and what we get wrong and how we often, with the best of intentions, make mistakes. But I also want to now look at the positives of what you bring to it. Lizzie, what did you learn about yourself? I mean, here you are studying at university with this extraordinary future ahead of you, having gone through the lowest of lows and trying to take your own life. But what did you learn about yourself in those moments?
I learnt that I was a lot more resilient than I gave myself credit for. I managed to sit up here today and talk about my experience and find housing to recover from some of the trauma that I went through and be able to walk out every day and live my life.
Tony, what did you learn? What have you learned about yourself?
I've learnt that I'm a stronger person than I thought I was, and that I'm a better person than I thought I was.
What do you mean a better person than you thought you were?
People, when I was growing up, people always told me I was a bad kid, and that everything that was going wrong was my fault. I now realise that I'm not a bad person. I'm a person who actually cares about other people a great deal. And when you care about other people and help people, well, you can't be that bad now, can you? And I also realised that a lot of what was going on wasn't my fault at all. So that's, a lot of what was happening was not my fault, but I felt it was.
Yeah, I can relate.
And I felt that I was a bad kid because I was told I was. I now realise that I'm actually a pretty good bloke.
I can vouch for that. Having just met you, I can vouch for that. What about you, Grace? What did you...
Well,
what you were describing before, and, 2% of people get off heroin. It's hard. What have you learned about yourself?
I looked it up and it said 1%. And then my sister said, no, it's 100% better, it's 2%. I think the best I've read is 5%.
Right. So what did you learn about yourself?
Well, I'll say resilience as well, but and also not how much you can get used to, not necessarily in a good way. Like I remember the first time I had to, anyway, probably shouldn't go into that, but you get used to things, bad things, too easily. And
life becomes very normal, even in the worst circumstances.
When at first it's like, I can't believe I'm doing this. And then after a couple of years, you're like, oh, that's normal. And then in school when I'm doing tours, I'm like, I used to do that. But also just how resourceful you become. Like I used to paint big buckets of water black, so when I got home in the afternoon, I'd sit them out in the sun so it was hot, so when you could have a shower. I used to use tea bags as floss and just you become resourceful. So you got to.
What was the turning point, Grace? Is there just one, or is it, 2 steps forward and a step back, or a step sideways, or is there a moment for you that stands out? Some act, some person, yourself, a moment that changed things for you?
Then what changed for me mainly was the bad things happening at once. That's what stopped me using and that. But what changed, what people on the street that helped me and that really helped was just little things like someone walking past and giving me a Slurpee and just looking at me in the eyes and saying, if I used to go around asking people for change, it's like, just look at me and say no, just to feel invisible. And it's wasn't nice.
So that made you...
Just say no.
Right.
Even just say no. Just look at me.
Did that make you feel like you had to make a change?
Yeah,
Is
I
that
was
what
just
led
so
to
sick of being sick, and I knew my lifestyle wasn't sustainable. But and I did want to stop using, but and I knew my life wouldn't change unless I stopped using. But I just didn't think I could. But yeah.
Lizzie, was there some moment? I mean, was it the moment when you realised, I can either die or I can get the treatment I need?
Yeah, it was definitely when I attempted to take my own life. That for me, laying there helpless with all the people I love around me, I realised that I have one of two options. I can either give in to what's going on and what's happened to me, or I can try my hardest to get back out there. And that's what I did.
Tony, for you?
I can think of three, actually. The first was when I was 16 years old, and I stayed at Mission Australia Youth Refuge on the North Shore called Clifton Lodge for 2 months. And that was the first time people started telling me, actually, you're not a bad kid, Tony. We think you've got a lot of potential. They'd listened to what I was saying about my life, and they didn't judge, and they supported me as best they could. Then in my mid-20s, I became a Christian. That was useful because I started to see a better way to live, and I started to build support networks. And the third time was when I was 30, and that was when I was actually diagnosed with clinical depression for the first time by a GP and started taking medication for it.
Something that made sense. This explained behaviour.
Yes, that's right.
And faith, you mentioned Christianity. How did that come into your life, and what difference did that make to your life?
I started looking at Christianity because I knew my life was out of control. In my early 20s, I thought to myself that by the time I'm 30, I'm either going to be dead from suicide or a motorcycle accident, because riding motorcycles very fast when you're drunk or stoned or whatever is a good way to kill yourself. Yeah. Or I was going to wind up in jail because I was dealing drugs. If they'd caught me, I'd have gone to jail. Or I was going to wind up in a psych hospital. I didn't like those options. I started looking around and I found Christianity because it was what I was looking for. It's what I needed to find.
Is this where Rough Edges comes in, do you think, Ryan? It's, building on what people themselves bring to their lives. And not everyone is going to be as strong, and not everyone's going to be at a position where they can, turn their lives around, to use that phrase. But what does Rough Edges bring at this point?
Yeah, so for us, we really focus on community first of all. So, all our volunteers, and holler to our volunteers, an amazing bunch of people. All our volunteers actually go through a weekend of training before they start volunteering at Roughies. And, what that is about is basically injecting people with, that have been told to listen, told to empathise, told to gently be with people, I suppose, and creating a community that does likewise, to empathise, to listen with each other. We try to invite a few other services that focus around, I guess, giving dignity. So we have our legal service run by our lawyer Belinda, who's does an amazing job of just supporting people through legal issues. We have a haircut group that come in and give people haircuts. We have Orange Sky Laundry that come to us on a Friday to give laundry service, and basically just help people with those little things that we all kind of take for granted but are essential for us. And then the other thing that we try to do is just partner with people and walk the journey with them. So what do you need? How can we help? And you're in charge, you drive, but we'll be with you along the way.
Yeah, we'll sort of top up the gas tank.
I love that, top up the gas tank. Send your questions through. I'd love to put some of the questions if you have them as well. We've got fantastic panel here with us, so please send your questions through and I can put them to the panellists here. Before we go to some of those questions, Tony, were there moments of kindness that stand out for you that made a difference?
There's been many. The last time I was homeless was actually about 3 years ago, when I was kicked out of my boarding house simply because the landlord wanted to renovate the room and he wanted to move me into a smaller room. I couldn't fit what furniture I had in there, so he told me to throw it out on the footpath. I told him I'm not going to do it, so he kicked me out. If it hadn't been for John and Catherine allowing me to couch surf at their place for 2 months, I would have been back to sleeping on the street. And that was just 3 years ago.
Yeah.
There have been so many over the years, it's hard to keep track of them all.
Yeah. There's a great question. I'll put this one to you, Grace. How do we create belonging and inclusion as a member of the street community? And it's important to remember that, isn't it? We are talking about not just individuals, but a community of people. And did you find that, a sense of belonging and inclusion? And if not, How do you create that?
I did, I was always with other homeless people and that sort of thing, and like it was the other homeless people that always told me about which services to go to and that where I could stay and where Scots were and that sort of thing. But it wasn't like still I'd be worried to sleep by myself because I'd be nervous, but then the people that I'd have around me I'd end up with stuff stolen or wake up being groped or that sort of thing. So kind of.
Tony, what can people do to build a stronger sense of community?
Basically, they have to be there for each other, talk to each other, listen to each other, not judge, help each other as best they can with whatever they've got.
There's a great question here, Ryan. I'll put this one to you. What are things people can do to end homelessness? It's ending homelessness, of course, was that easy, of course it would be done, but not just people who are experiencing homelessness, but as a community, because I'm fully aware, you know, when we get every year with the federal budget delivered, I work in the media, no one talks about homelessness, no one. We don't see people marching in the streets in protests about ending homelessness. We do about a whole lot of other issues, but we don't see that. They're often invisible. Homelessness does not change governments. People don't vote on issues of homelessness, and yet we all share in this. So we're talking about things people can do to end it.
Yeah.
What do we all have to do?
I think that the first thing is, I mean, there's some small things, and that is just educate yourself. Try to understand homelessness as best you can. That it's not an us versus them kind of situation, or it's not a lazy or choice situation. I think the other things we need to be doing is advocating for better housing conditions. Like if we talk about Darlinghurst, where Rough Edges exists, we've seen, anyone have a guess at, or anyone know how much housing prices have risen in the last 20 years?
Oh my goodness. In the last 20 years, in the last year.
It's about
The last
Year on year. I mean, it's prohibitive. People can't afford to buy a place.
Exactly.
Buy?
Yeah.
Rent, yeah.
So that's the big piece of the puzzle right there, is creating space that people can actually afford to live in. And it shouldn't be that hard for a country like Australia to have housing for people. And so that's the first thing, just advocate, keep it at the front of our leaders' minds that there needs to be more housing in this country that people can afford.
We don't have housing for people, we have housing for profit, don't we?
Exactly, yeah.
And the strange thing about all of that is that it actually costs state governments more money to leave someone sleeping in a park than it does to put them in social housing, simply because of all the support services, you know, like ambulances and hospital emergency departments and community mental health services, all those sorts of services. If we spent less time knocking down and rebuilding football stadiums, more money spending, more money on social housing, it would actually cost the state government.
And Tony's a football fan too.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Big Bunnies fan.
A bit, so am I. I'm still recovering, Tony.
Yeah.
Still recovering.
That close.
Too close. Anyway, we'll save that.
22 and 22.
We'll save that. Yeah, well, hopefully. How do you get your voice heard, Grace? Because I said before, homelessness and homeless people are often invisible politically.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I suppose, I mean, I really like doing the tours because I can have people give me some kind of, I try and give people empathy to tell them actually the story. I just try and pick people to remember, that they don't have the same opportunities and everything too, but it's a hard one.
There's a great question here. I'll put this one to you, Lizzie. What is the best way to engage with a person experiencing homelessness?
I would have to say with compassion. It's one of the most important things, I think, to listen to someone, to not judge them, and to just show them respect. That's often all someone's looking for. They're not asking you to solve their problems. They know you can't solve their problems with a $5 note. They're not asking for that. They're just asking for someone to listen to them and to be heard.
This is a great question, Tony. What is the least accurate stereotype, and how do we combat these stereotypes? And we touched on this a little bit earlier, didn't we? But you know, the common sort of image of a homeless person is this person sleeping rough, and you went through the 4 different areas where we misunderstand that. So what's the least accurate stereotype, do you think?
The least accurate stereotype is that homeless people are just lazy. It's actually really hard work being homeless because you wake up, you've got to find somewhere to eat, you've got to find somewhere to have a shower. There's all sorts of things you've got to do. It's not a question of these people, you know, homeless people want to just lie there, lay around and be dole bludgers. That's just complete rubbish. It's not what it is. How to combat that? Well, it really is just education. It's people sitting down, having a conversation with people, getting to know them, getting to know what the issues are, and finding out firsthand this is what the real deal is.
Well, what do you think, Grace? The stereotypes?
I think there's a big stereotype, like, because we're in Australia, we've got Centrelink, we've got Medicare, we've got housing, like, why would you be homeless? We've got these services, but the services don't work the way that people do, like...
10-year waiting list.
Yeah, 10-year waiting list. And if you get priority, it's meant to be a year, but it's still like 3-6 years. And often they mail the homeless people letters, and if you're homeless, you don't get a letter, and then you get kicked off the list. And I've been kicked off the list after 4 years, and I'm like, what's the point? Another stereotype which I find really annoying is people just think that you're an old man on a park bench, and because I don't look like since I don't look homeless, like, you know, they just think you're not homeless. Well, I did before, but yes, they just think that all homeless, that's good for people they see. But like you said, we're invisible. Most of us.
You said something before about drug use, and I think it applies equally to homelessness, doesn't it? Ryan, blame the person.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing. I think get curious. If anyone's been watching Ted Lasso, there's a great quote on that where I think he said something like, don't get judgmental, get curious. And I love that saying because it just goes, well, let's ask a few questions here. Why is this person in this situation? What's happened? And so, yeah, that's my big thing, I think, at the moment. That's what I've been trying to tell myself lately, get curious.
It sort of goes to this next question in a way, shifting community perception and driving the conversation. I mean, this conversation is really important. Everybody tuning in here and people sending through questions, this is really important, and this conversation needs to be heard more widely. But how do we, Ryan, shift that and drive the conversation? Is the media interested, do you think, or do we just get the current affairs stories that Grace was talking about? You know,
I saw it was a current affair one. I was talking about homeless people stealing $1 million views from down at Circular Quay, and it's like, really now?
Yeah, as if those views aren't free for everyone.
Yeah, they're not $1 million view. Yes, you don't own the view. What changes that conversation, right?
I mean, one thing I'd say is come and volunteer, you know, and meet people. It's really hard to not like people that you've met, you know. Like, once you get close to someone and you actually hear their story and hear their background, it really makes a massive difference. And don't get me wrong, there's people there that will drive you nuts. but I mean, there's people in most rooms that will drive you nuts, right? So it's really hard to walk away from volunteering at Rough Edges or Wayside Chapel or any of the other services and go, I still don't think people are giving themselves a fair go or whatever. Or
they're not trying hard enough.
They're not trying hard enough. You don't walk away from an experience like Rough Edges with that thought in your mind.
Yeah, how do people volunteer? What are you looking for? What can people do? How much time do people need to give? How do we get that drive going?
Yeah, so we ask people to volunteer for about usually 3 hours. During COVID, it's been 1.5. Usually 3 hours a shift every fortnight. And, you know...
And those shifts are across what? The day, night?
It's a nighttime shift usually. We do have Wednesdays and Fridays where we run a lunchtime service. And what we're looking for are people that are great listeners, people that are fun and engaging, and and if you're not that, come along anyway, because we got a lot of fun and engaging volunteers.
And how do
You can wash
people
dishes.
Or you can wash dishes. Yeah.
How do people volunteer? Do you turn up? What's the process?
Yeah, so we do have a bit of an in-depth service process. The first thing is to come to an information session, and we just want you to know what you're in for, basically. The second thing is to do a training, which does come at a cost, but we're very proud of the training we offer. And then we'll have you on the roster soon after.
Fantastic. Let me ask you this, Lizzie. There's a question here that asks, and these are fantastic questions, by the way. Thank you so much for sending them through. We're getting close to the end of time, but keep them coming because we'll get through as many as we can. What types of early intervention are most important? What would have made a difference? You said something that struck me, and I didn't get a chance to follow it up then, but I will now. You kept everything quiet and private. You went through this alone. What type of early intervention would have made a difference for you?
Well, I think people sharing their story is such a powerful thing. I think if I was back in school and I heard someone talk about their lived experience with mental health, then I probably would feel more comfortable reaching out to someone and letting them know what I was going through. But I just thought I was alone. I thought I was the only one facing that, and I didn't want to speak up about it.
And at home was no option to speak up?
No, obviously at home that's where all my problems came from, so I wasn't really going to turn to my parents.
What about for you, Grace? Would early it was quite a similar story in some ways, because you said you wanted to hide things from your family. What would have made a difference? What would have stopped you going on that slide?
I just wish we'd spoken about it. We still haven't really spoken about it. Like, Mum, they knew I was stoned, and she must have known. And, like, they got told by the police there was needles. And they're like, why do you have needles? I'm like, to measure out for drugs. Like, they would have known. But Mum used to just say, you look tired. And, so we never really spoke about it.
That might have been her way to try to have the conversation.
That was her way of saying, you look stoned.
But I mean, look, I'm a parent, and I know it's hard to have conversations, and sometimes they don't want to listen, but also sometimes who was it who said earlier, you, Lizzie, you said people are scared of the answer.
I think...
are people scared of the answer?
I think people are also scared what to say. Like, I was raped when I was 15, and I told my parents about it, and they never spoke to me about it. And I think that's part of the reason I moved out too, because I just wanted to change schools, because I was weird at schools. And I used to think that if you change your situation, you'd be happier. But wherever you go, you take yourself with you. Yeah. But I wish I'd talked about it earlier, because... it's just so silly I didn't say anything. I'm still annoyed about the same things.
Uncle Tony, what are some of the ways we can break the cycle of chronic homelessness?
Okay, I mean, obviously we need more housing, but we also need more support services. We need, there's outreach services. I used to work for Mission Australia's Mission Beat service, which these days does a lot of outreach work with driving around the inner city area in vans and talking to people, getting them into crisis accommodation. From crisis accommodation, people can then move out into more permanent accommodation, but often they're going to need support services like counselling and talking through issues, through health issues or budget issues, or help getting onto Centrelink benefits. There's all sorts of services that people will need help with that then help them help themselves. And we need more of those.
Ryan, Roughtober is about raising money. It's about raising funds and through raising awareness and these types of conversations. What do you need to do the work that you need to do?
Yeah, again, a great
question. As much as possible, right?
A big question.
Look, what we trying to gain is professional staff. In the last little while, actually just today, we hired another social worker. We need to hire probably another social worker yet. And so the first thing is just professional staff. I think you know, when you talk about ending chronic homelessness, you know, homelessness, as you're probably picking up at this time, is an extremely difficult sort of situation to bring people through, and requires a whole lot of gaining trust and building that network of services that can assist people. And so, yeah, I think the professional staff do go a long way, and I think...
And you need the money to do that too, right?
Money to do that, exactly.
Yeah. So you need
and the
people
resources that go with it.
You need people to donate. You need people to get out there and support you. You need people to participate over Roughtober.
Exactly, yeah.
Volunteer.
Yeah.
And volunteer and be part of it. Yeah.
Is it harder now because of COVID? Is it harder to get people to engage?
There's just no comparison. You know, that I think when I say we really focus on community, it was, you know, 1,000 times harder trying to have a community when we couldn't let people in the space. And so, you know, throughout lockdown, we've been running a takeaway food only service, and you know, the purpose behind that was to just be a consistent place of support for people. And, you know, it's nowhere near as much fun for us, you know, as a service, and fun is an important value, that we don't have the ability to just sit down with someone. And even now that we're all coming out of lockdown, we don't have the ability to sit down with someone without kind of, you know, thinking, how do we greet you? Can I shake your hand? Can I fist bump? Can I, you know, like all these things are now so much more difficult.
They get in the way of people volunteering and feeling if they should volunteer or can volunteer.
Can volunteer. You know, we had a lot of volunteers drop out for the time because, you know, they had their own situations with health issues, or a family member who had health issues. It was a nightmare, to tell you the truth.
Well, thankfully...
You can't smile with a mask on either.
No, you can't.
Terrible.
Yeah.
Thankfully, we are coming out of that. We're out of time now. It's very hot here, I can tell you. We've been sitting under these lights. I think we're all sweating. Thank you so much for sending through your questions. I want to thank, again, all of you for being up here and sharing the story. Ryan, Grace, Uncle Tony and Lizzie, thank you so much for being so honest and so giving and so generous to be able to share those stories with us. I want to thank the tech group for providing the behind-the-scenes expertise and bringing up the second microphone for me after my microphone died halfway through the interview. Again, this is a fundraising event. So, as we heard, we need volunteers, we need support, we need people to make sure that we don't lose another generation. We want to see more Graces and Tonys and Lizzies up here next year when we come back and talk. We want to see fewer people having to sleep on the street. So I encourage you to continue to reach out to your sponsors, ask them to support you. The funds raised from this event will ensure that Rough Edges can also continue running next year. If you'd like to find out how to support Rough Edges or get involved, the website is www.roughedges.org. Ryan, that's it? www.roughedges.org?
Yep, that's the one.
Any other ways people can find you?
Facebook.
Yep, all the socials.
Snapchat.
Instagram.
Instagram, Facebook.
So you're open to all of that as well. Thank you again to all of you tuning in and being part of this conversation and to this very special discussion that we were able to have. Thank you all. It was a fantastic hour or so to spend with you. Good luck with your exams.
Thank you, I need it.
You will absolutely kill it. Thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
And thank you, Stan.
Stan, yeah.